Yes, black team passes the basketball back and forth. So that's what you do. So now you have an ambition and an aim and a value. And the ambition and the aim and the value, they're all the same thing, and that is to perform well at the task. Now the thing that's so cool about this, and this is really so cool, it's just unbelievable that this is the case. It's like a complete validation of a certain element of the Buddhist worldview. So they pass the ball for a couple of minutes, and then the experimenter says to you, how many? And you say 15, and because you're happy, and you're happy with yourself because you've been paying attention, and the experimenter says, yeah, that's right,
I'm
or
not
maybe
up to
not,
that
maybe you
just
missed
yet.
one. And then the experimenter says, did you see the gorilla? And half of you say, what gorilla? Like, really? And the experimenter says, yes. And then he rewinds it and plays the video, and like a minute and a half into the 3-minute video, sure enough, in walks this guy in a gorilla suit, 6'3" or so, stands in the middle of the game, right in the middle of the game, the same size as the players, perfectly, obviously evident, beats his chest for like a second and a half, and then sort of saunters off. And half the people who watch the video don't see the gorilla, which is absolutely shocking. And what that means is that your ambitions blind you to the nature of reality. Now, they illuminate some reality, but they blind you to most of it. And that's fine, because there's not a lot of you in some ways. You're a very pinpoint thing, like a laser beam. And so you just can't be attending to everything all the time. But one of the things that you might ask yourself once you know that is that if you're suffering dreadfully, then one possibility is that you're so fixed on the point, you're so fixed on a point, the fact that you're so fixed on the point that you're fixed on might be integrally related to why things are going so catastrophically wrong. Now perhaps not, because there's a lot of arbitrariness about life, and perhaps you suffer even when you don't deserve to. That seems to happen in the book of Job, for example, because Job is a good guy and God has a bet with Satan, which seems like another relatively nasty thing to do, to let Satan just torture him, and he does quite nicely, to see if he'll turn against God. And it seems like a rather playground sort of thing for God to engage in, but the point is that even in a document like the Old Testament, there's ample suggestion that sometimes people just get wiped out and hurt, even if they're living good moral lives, aiming properly and all that. There's an arbitrariness in life that's not eradicable, but it's possible that it's what you're clinging to that's hurting you, and it's even possible that's the thing that you're clinging to the hardest that's hurting you the most. That could easily be someone you love. Like lots of times I see people in therapy and they're miserable for one reason or another, and sometimes it's because they have a very close relationship with a family member, and that just isn't working. The family member, for the sake of simplicity, we'll say, is not really oriented towards helping them have a good life. The family member is instead oriented towards making them as bloody miserable as you can possibly make anyone, and what would you say, exploiting the bond between family members in order to enable that. And then sometimes the sacrifice that's necessary is either merely distancing yourself from that person, sometimes substantively, and sometimes seriously distancing yourself from it, like we don't talk anymore ever. And so that's pretty damn rough, and it hurts and all of that, but it's a good example of the fact that sometimes, in order to
hope in the left hand,
extract
surety
yourself from
in
the
the
miserable bit of chaos that you happen to be enmeshed in, you have to let go of what you love best. If the world you are seeing is not the world you want, therefore it's time to examine your values.
I'm not up to
really
that just yet.
It's really worth thinking about, because the alternative too is to curse fate. Right, because if it isn't you, there's nothing you can do to change.
Pruning a
There isn't
branch can
something
save
you're
a
doing
tree.
that's wrong, then it's fate itself, it's the world itself, it's other people, let's say, because they're a huge part of the world, or it's the nature of the world itself, or it's God himself in whatever form you either believe in or don't believe in, because it's fundamentally all the same in the sort of situation that I'm describing. So, and one of the things that's really interesting, and I mentioned this before about the Israelites in the Old Testament, is that they they got this right. It's really something, because what happens to the Israelites over and over in the Old Testament is that they get all puffed up about how wonderful they are, and then they make moral errors because they're arrogant, and then God comes along and just cuts them into pieces for like generation after generation, and then they wobble back to their feet, but they always maintain the same attitude, which is, we did something wrong. We did something wrong. It's like an axiom rather than observation, is that if things are not laying themselves out for us as they should be, then we cannot curse God. We have to look to ourselves. Well, and you think, well, why not curse God? Because maybe it's his fault. And that's a really good question. And one of the things that I've tried to figure out over the last 30 years is, well, why not just curse God? Because there is this arbitrary element to existence, and we are vulnerable, and there is plenty of suffering, and things are unfair. Like, there's problems, right? There's injustice and unfairness and all of these things, and endless suffering. So why not just lay it at the feet of God? And whether God exists or not, in some sense, by the way, with regards to the metaphysics of this particular discussion, is not relevant. The point remains the same either way. And the answer is, as far as I can tell, that if you refuse to take on the responsibility yourself, and you attempt to lay it at the feet of either society or being itself, then you instantly start to act in a way that makes everything much worse, not only for you, but for everyone else, and maybe even for being itself. And so, it's not helpful. Now, if you decide that it's you've got the problem, maybe that's not even true. Like, maybe you are someone who's being tortured by the bet between God and Satan, and like, too bad for you if that happens to be the case. But it still seems to be the appropriate thing for a human being who's standing on his or her own 2 feet in a proper manner to take the responsibility on for themselves, regardless of the counter arguments that might be made against it. That's really something. So there's that. The same thing, and the same, so interesting. Again, these images, you see, in this one, you have the specter of death in the tree with the snake and the fruit. Now, fruit is interesting too. I already made the case that there's a tight linkage between what you eat and information, right? A conceptual link as well as a practical link. But it's also the case that we can see colors. And the question is, why? And the answer is because we evolved to see ripe fruit. So in the story of Adam and Eve, human beings are given vision by the snake and the fruit, and that turns out to be correct. So isn't that something? And then you think, what role do women play in relationship to men? Well, first, they make them self-conscious. Let's not ever forget about that. Because I would say the primary role that women have in relationship to men is to make them self-conscious.
Well done,
and men don't precisely like that. There's nothing that will make a man more self-conscious than being rejected. And why? Because why is he rejected? Well, obviously, Mother Nature, in the guise of that particular woman, has said, you're not so bad for a friend, but there's no reason that your genetic material should propagate itself into the future. Right, well, and it's not like men are exactly happy about being made self-conscious by women, right? It's a major source of continual tension between men and women, and it's no wonder. But it's also the case, and this is something really cool and interesting to know, we diverged, we diverged from the common ancestor between us and chimpanzees about 6 million years ago. Here's why, at least in part. Chimpanzee females are non-discriminant maters. They'll mate with any male. When they go into heat, which human females don't, when they go into heat, then any male is allowed access. Now, the dominant males chase the subordinate males away. And so the dominant males are more likely to leave offspring, but it's not because of the female choice. It's not the case with human beings. Human females engage in hypergamy, and hypergamy is and this is also true cross-culturally, and it's also quite It's just as extensive in Scandinavia. Not quite, there's a bit of attenuation, but not much. Women mate across and up dominance hierarchies. Men mate across and down. Okay, and that has to be the case because obviously it has to work that way. If one goes up, the other has to go down. The socioeconomic status of a woman is almost determines almost zero of her attractiveness towards a man. Whereas the socioeconomic status of a man is a major determinant of his attractiveness towards a woman. And it isn't his wealth either, because that's been tested. It's his capacity to generate